Hey, church, I wanted to talk with you today. So, yesterday we started a series of Devos over the next week about the life of Joseph. Because this Sunday we're starting a new series called God in My Past, God in My Present, God in My Future, and God in My Eternity. And so, the first Sunday, this coming Sunday, is God in My Past, and we're going to look at the life of Joseph. And like I said yesterday, Joseph's life, the story goes from Genesis 37 to the end of the book, Genesis 50, and that's just way too much to try to cover. The reality is just too much to try to cover. Joseph dies in Genesis 50, and so we're kind of doing some devotions, just going through the big highlights of his life. So we're laying that foundation. So today we're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 39. And if you know the life of Joseph, then you know this story. And I'm going to be a little bit vague about it because it's a PG-13 story. But essentially, Joseph is sold into slavery by his brothers, and he ends up in Potiphar's house. And Potiphar is he works for Pharaoh. He's part of he's actually in charge of all the guards. He's in charge of the palace guards for Pharaoh, and Joseph becomes not just a servant in the house of Potiphar, but Joseph becomes like the one who is running Potiphar's house. And in fact, the Bible says the only thing that Potiphar has to worry about because of Joseph is the food that he eats. And there's a couple verses in there that I find really it happens. There's this little statement that gets made in verse 2 of chapter 39, and then again in 23. So, like the second verse of the chapter and the last verse of the chapter. And it says this the Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. God was with Joseph. And, you know, I think that's an important thing that we need to remember. Yesterday we talked about Joseph being a bit arrogant and naive, and his family situation, growing up with a dad who was manipulated time and time again, who also had manipulated situations. You know, he carried a lot of baggage, but I think the important thing is that God continued to be with him no matter what the circumstances were. In fact, if you read the entire chapter 39 here in Genesis, which I would encourage you to do, God is with Joseph and he prospered and great things happened. And Potiphar's house was prosperous and it was good. And it said, you know, Potiphar, all he had to worry about was eating. That's all he had to do. Joseph was taking care of everything else. Finances, the running of the house, all the business of the house, everything was taken care of and it was prosperous and great things were happening. And then we run into this moment where he gets falsely accused. Potiphar's wife desires Joseph in a way that Joseph knows isn't right. In fact, he says, you know, my master Potiphar has given me everything except for you. There is no way that what it is that you are looking for is ever going to happen, because Joseph understands his position. He's honoring Potiphar in everything that he does, from the diligence of how he does the work that he is doing to honoring Potiphar's house and the people within it. And so he gets falsely accused. And that false accusation winds him up in prison. And in this text, we never get to see Joseph defend himself. He never has this moment in this chapter where he gets to tell Potiphar, hey, this person's lying, or the house servants, they were out at the time, and when they came back, Potiphar's wife makes his accusation, and Joseph's never able to say, hey, no, let me tell you what really happened. Let me tell you my point of view. And actually, this moment jumps for me to Christ. Christ is put into a situation where he is accused of being blasphemous. He's accused of false things. False accusations are being made against him. And basically, Christ's response is nothing. He doesn't defend himself. He doesn't have to, because God is with him. And we see this here. I'm sure that Joseph doesn't want to be put in jail, but God is with him. And I think one of the things that we talk about when we talk about our past is we have two basically situations. We have a situation where we've done something to someone else, and that carries with us. We have the guilt that goes with us doing something to someone. Maybe we've been mean or cruel or rude or whatever the situation. We have done something to someone, and that's in our past, and then we feel guilty about it. And then the other situation where something's been done to us, and we feel this shame of that whole thing. And Joseph, again, beaten, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and yet in the midst of everything, God is with him. And at the very end of the chapter 39, it says the warden, he was in prison, and the warden liked Joseph, and Joseph, because God was with him, was put in charge of all of the prisoners. And the warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. On Sunday, if you were able to watch our Easter Sunday sermon, one of the things that I talked about is that promises, that our hope in God is based on his promises. And one of the promises that I talked about comes out of Romans, and Paul says, that I am convinced that there is nothing that can separate us from God, from his love. Death, famine, nakedness, prison, anything you can think of. COVID-19, nothing can separate us from God's love. And verse 28, I was reading that this morning, and verse 28 stood out to me. So this is Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. I want to be really clear here. I'm not saying that God's going to make you prosperous the way that he did with Joseph in this situation, where money is going to be flowing in and you're going to have this stature and position. That's not what it is. I think that Joseph was uniquely gifted and suited for these situations. But what we need to look at here is that Joseph was an honorable man who loved God and honored him above all else. And God blessed him because of that. And so we're going to continue on the life of Joseph, and we're going to have this moment where his past is going to come right into face to face with him. Right now, he's just kind of existing, going day by day, and good things are happening because God is working in his life. And his past is going to come face to face with him. And we're going to talk about how he deals with that this Sunday. But I think the most important thing here is we need to recognize when we have done something to someone, or someone has done something to us, what's our response going to be? Is it going to be anger? Is that thing going to be the thing that defines us? Because when we look at Joseph's life, I don't think of this false accusation being the thing that defines who Joseph is. What I see is a man who honored God, and nothing separated him from God's love. That's what I see in Joseph. That's what I see when Paul writes that in Romans 8 and 9. And that's what I want to see in our own lives. That the things that have been done to us and the things that we've done in our past are not defining who our future is or who we are in this present moment. We can move past those things through the healing through Jesus Christ. And Joseph, no matter what the circumstance is, God's hand was on him, and he continued to move forward in his life. And those things that tripped him up, being sold into slavery, being accused of something falsely, did not define him. He didn't stop at those things. He didn't wallow in misery. Yeah, he felt those things immediately. I'm sure that he would have had to have. But he became whole because of God. And so I want to share that with you this afternoon. I want to remind you, hey, tonight at 7 o'clock on Facebook Live, we're going to be playing Scattergories. It's going to be a great time, so join us on Facebook Live for a game tonight. Church, I love you. I do miss you. Have a great rest of your day.